The desert sun hung low like a brass coin against the horizon, painting the barren landscape in shades of rust and gold. Mary Louise Carter squinted against the glare as she made her way down the rocky path toward the Rio Grande, her water bucket swinging rhythmically at her side. The year was 1873, and the small town of Redemption Creek had seen better days before the drought, before the outlaws, before her father's blood had soaked into the dusty main street. At 19, Mary Louise had already witnessed more death than most folks saw in a lifetime. The frontier had a way of aging a person, carving lines of worry into young faces and stealing the sparkle from hopeful eyes. But somehow, she'd managed to keep a flicker of something pure burning inside her chest. Maybe it was faith, maybe stubbornness, or maybe just the simple refusal to let the West break her like it had broken so many others. The river was her sanctuary. While the menfolk spent their evenings in the saloon, drowning their sorrows in rot-gut whiskey and tall tales, Mary Louise found her peace in the gentle murmur of water over stones. Here, she could pretend the world wasn't full of quick-draw contests and shallow graves. Here, she could remember her father's laugh before a stray bullet from the McKenna gang had silenced it forever. She was humming an old church hymn when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a trick of the fading light, a shadow among the cottonwoods that lined the riverbank. But as she drew closer, the shadow took shape, a man, face down in the shallow water, his clothes dark with what could only be blood. Mary Louise's first instinct was to run. Every lesson her mother had drummed into her head screamed danger. Don't trust strangers, especially not the ones who come bearing guns and trouble. But her feet seemed rooted to the sandy bank as she stared at the still form. The man's hand twitched. Before she could think better of it, Mary Louise dropped her bucket and waded into the cool water. The current tugged at her skirts as she grabbed the stranger under his arms, grunting with effort as she dragged him onto dry ground. He was heavier than he looked, all lean muscle and weathered leather. Up close, she could see the damage. 3 bullet wounds decorated his torso like violent flowers blooming through his shirt. His face, what she could see of it beneath the dirt and blood, was angular and sun-beaten, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. A Colt .45 hung loosely in a worn holster at his hip. "Mister," she shook his shoulder gently, "can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open gray as storm clouds. She noted with an odd flutter in her stomach and fixed on her face with startling intensity. "Angel," his voice was rough as sandpaper, "that you—" "No, Angel," Mary Louise said firmly, though her cheeks warmed at the notion. "Just a girl who found you bleeding in the river. What's your name?" "Ethan." He coughed, and a trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Ethan Cole." The name meant nothing to her, but the way his hand gripped her arm, desperate, like a drowning man clutching driftwood, told her everything she needed to know. This was a man running from something, or someone. "We need to get you help," she said, already calculating the distance back to town, to Doc Morrison's office. "No." His grip tightened. "No town, no doctor." Mary Louise bit her lip. The smart thing would be to leave him here. Let fate take its course. A man who couldn't go to town for doctoring was a man with enemies, and enemies in the West had a habit of shooting first and asking questions over your grave. But those eyes, Lord help her. Those eyes held something that called to the stubborn compassion her father had always said would be her downfall. "My place, then," she heard herself saying. "It's not much, just a lean-to by the river bend, but it's hidden." He tried to sit up, grimaced, and fell back. Can't ask you." "You're not asking. I'm telling." She stood, brushing wet sand from her skirts with more confidence than she felt. "Can you walk if I help you?" What followed was the longest quarter-mile of Mary Louise's life. Ethan leaned heavily against her, his breath coming in ragged gasps, leaving a trail of blood droplets that she prayed the evening wind would cover with dust. Every shadow could hide a pursuer. Every crack of a twig might herald disaster. The lean-to wasn't much to look at, just a shelter she'd cobbled together from salvaged lumber and canvas. A place to store fishing supplies and escape her mother's endless fretting. But it was dry and hidden behind a thick stand of mesquite, invisible from the main path. She eased him onto the narrow cot she kept there, wincing at his pained grunt. In the fading light filtering through the canvas, she could better assess his injuries. The bullets had torn through him, but seemed to have missed anything immediately fatal, a small miracle in itself. "I need to clean these wounds," she said, reaching for the medical supplies she kept for fishing accidents. Her father had taught her basic doctoring, skills that came in handy when the nearest real doctor was often drunk or absent. "This is going to hurt." "Been hurt before," Ethan muttered, but his jaw clenched tight when she began cleaning the first wound with whiskey from a hidden flask. As she worked, Mary Louise found herself studying his face. He couldn't be more than 30, she guessed, but his features carried the weight of hard years. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his sun-darkened skin. His hands, she noticed, were calloused from ropework and reins, but his fingers were long and surprisingly gentle-looking for a man who clearly lived by the gun. "Why were you in the river?" she asked, partly to distract him from the pain, partly from genuine curiosity. "Trying to lose the dogs on my trail," he said through gritted teeth. "Water hides scent, covers tracks." "Who's after you?" His gray eyes found hers again, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding, or maybe warning. The kind of men who don't take kindly to someone saying no to their brand of justice. Mary Louise's hand stilled. "You're an outlaw." "I'm a man who chose conscience over orders." His laugh was bitter. "In the army. That makes you worse than an outlaw. Makes you a traitor." The army, that changed things. Deserters were hunted with particular vigor. She knew. The military didn't take kindly to men who broke their oaths, regardless of the reason. "What orders?" She resumed her work, pressing clean cloth against the wounds. Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he'd passed out. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Ever heard of Sand Creek?" Everyone had heard of Sand Creek, though the stories varied depending on who told them. Some called it a victory against hostile Indians. Others whispered darker words: massacre, women and children, surrender flags ignored. "That was 9 years ago," she said carefully. "There've been others since, smaller, quieter, but just as wrong." His hand caught hers, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't ride down on another peaceful camp. Couldn't pretend those were enemy combatants when I could see the cooking fires, hear the children." Mary Louise felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't the confession of a common criminal or a coward. This was a man who'd chosen his soul over his duty, knowing the price. "So you ran?" "So I ran." He released her hand. "Been running for 3 months. They caught up to me outside Fort Stockton. Thought I'd lost them at the river." "How many are after you?" "Started with a full patrol, down to maybe 6 or 7 now." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've gotten good at running." Mary Louise finished bandaging the wounds and sat back on her heels. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to send him on his way come morning. But looking at him lying there, pale and wounded but still defiant, she knew she wouldn't. "You can stay here tonight," she said. "Tomorrow. We'll see about tomorrow." "You don't even know me." "I know enough." She stood, gathering the bloodied cloths. "I know you're hurt. I know you chose right over easy. And I know my daddy would have done the same thing in my place." "Your daddy sounds like a good man." "He was." The words came out steadier than she expected. "The McKenna gang killed him last spring, shot him down in the street because he wouldn't sell them supplies on credit." Ethan's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He died standing up for what was right. Seems that's something you'd understand." As she turned to leave, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Mary Louise," she paused at the canvas flap. "How did you—" You were talking to yourself while you worked, telling yourself your ma would tan your hide if she knew Mary Louise Carter was tending to strange men by the river. That ghost smile appeared again. You've got a nice voice, soothing. Heat crept up her neck. Get some rest. I'll check on you before dawn. Outside, the first stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Mary Louise stood for a moment, breathing in the sage-scented air, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd just hidden a military deserter, a man with trained killers on his trail. If anyone found out. But as she made her way back toward town, bucket forgotten by the riverbank, she found she didn't regret it. There was something about Ethan Cole, something in those storm-gray eyes that spoke of honor ground down but not broken, of a man who'd seen too much but still chose mercy over duty. The West was full of hard men who lived by violence and died the same way. But maybe, just maybe, she'd found one trying to choose a different path. As she climbed the path home, Mary Louise didn't notice the figure watching from the rimrock, or the glint of dying sunlight on a deputy's badge. She didn't know that by morning. Word would reach certain ears that the Carter girl had been seen dragging a wounded stranger from the river. For now, there was only the evening breeze, the distant call of a coyote, and the strange lightness in her chest that felt dangerously like hope. The fever came with the darkness, swift and merciless as a desert storm. Mary Louise had barely settled into fitful sleep when the sound of delirious muttering drew her from her bed. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and slipped out into the cool night air, her bare feet silent on the packed earth as she made her way back to the lean-to. Inside, Ethan thrashed on the narrow cot, his skin burning hot to the touch. The bandages she'd so carefully applied were already soaked through with sweat and fresh blood. His eyes, when they opened, didn't see her. They saw ghosts, memories, things that made him cry out in anguish. No, not the children. I won't. His hand groped for a weapon that wasn't there. Mary Louise caught his wrist, holding it gently but firmly. Shh. It's all right. You're safe. There are no children here. She'd seen fever dreams before, had nursed her father through one after he'd been grazed by a bullet 2 summers back. But Ethan's demons seemed particularly vicious, painted in shades of guilt and gun smoke. For 3 days and nights, she barely left his side. She bathed his burning skin with cool river water, forced willow bark tea between his cracked lips, and changed his bandages with steadily improving skill. When he cried out in his delirium, she sang the hymns her mother had taught her, letting her voice wash over him like a healing balm. It was dangerous, what she was doing. Each trip to the lean-to risked discovery. She had to time her visits carefully, slipping away during her mother's afternoon naps or in the pre-dawn hours when even the saloon had finally quieted. She told her mother she was fishing, needing time alone to grieve. Margaret Carter, worn down by her own sorrow, didn't question the lie. On the 3rd night, as she spooned broth between Ethan's lips, he suddenly gripped her wrist, his eyes, clear for the first time in days, fixed on her face. You're real, he whispered. As real as the sunrise, she assured him, unable to suppress a smile of relief. How do you feel? Like I've been dragged behind a Mustang through a cactus patch. He tried to sit up, winced, and thought better of it. How long? 3 days. You've been fighting quite a fever. His expression grew troubled. 3 days. They'll have picked up my trail by now. You need to lie still before you tear open those wounds I worked so hard to close. Mary Louise pressed him back down with a firmness that surprised them both. You're not going anywhere until you can sit a horse without falling off. Bossy little thing, aren't you? Someone has to be, seeing as you have the self-preservation instincts of a moth around a lamp flame. That earned her a rough chuckle, which turned into a cough. She helped him drink water, noting how his hand shook with the effort of holding the cup. Tell me, she said, settling back on the wooden crate she'd been using as a chair. Tell me what happened. Not the fever dreams, the real story. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the canvas ceiling. Outside, an owl called mournfully across the desert. I was stationed at Fort Grierson. He began. Cavalry, 6th Regiment. Good men, mostly. We kept the peace. Protected settlers. Hunted raiders, Apache, Comanche, bandits. It was honest work, or so I thought. Mary Louise remained silent, sensing the weight of what was coming. 6 months ago, new orders came down. New Commander 2 Colonel Josiah Bradshaw. Man had a reputation for efficiency. The word came out like a curse. He had ideas about how to solve the Indian problem once and for all. Sand Creek ideas. Ethan nodded grimly. Started small, burn a few crops here, poison a well there. Make life hard enough, he figured, and they'd move on without a fight. When that didn't work fast enough, he trailed off, lost in memory. You don't have to tell me, Mary Louise said softly. No, I need someone to know, to understand. He met her eyes. There was this camp, about 40 miles northwest of the fort, Kickapoo, mostly women and old men. The warriors were off hunting. Bradshaw got word they'd been harboring hostiles, his words for any Indian who didn't bow and scrape to his satisfaction. Mary Louise's hands clenched in her lap, already dreading what came next. He ordered a dawn raid, full force. I tried to reason with him, told him there was no evidence, that these people had been peaceful for years. He said I was going soft, that I'd forgotten which side I was on. Ethan's jaw tightened. I hadn't forgotten. I just remembered that there's supposed to be a difference between soldiers and butchers. What did you do? I rode ahead, warned them, helped them scatter into the canyons before Bradshaw's force arrived. A bitter smile touched his lips. He was displeased. Court-martial offense. He said, treason, aiding the enemy. But you saved them. Saved most of them. Bradshaw's scouts tracked down a few stragglers. The guilt in his voice was palpable. I should have done more. You did what you could, Mary Louise said firmly. That's more than most would have managed. Is it? Ethan shifted restlessly. Sometimes I wonder if I just traded one kind of blood on my hands for another. The men hunting me now, they're not all bad. Just following orders, like I used to. Following wrong orders doesn't make them right. He studied her face in the lamplight. You sound like you've given this some thought. My father used to say that a man's character isn't measured by how well he follows rules, but by knowing when to break them. She smiled sadly. Course, that kind of thinking got him killed. So maybe he wasn't the best philosopher. Or maybe he was the best kind, the kind who lived what he believed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of wind through mesquite, the eternal whisper of the river. I should go, Ethan said eventually. Every day I stay puts you in more danger. If they find out you helped me, they won't. You can't know that. These men, they're trained trackers. And there's more. Bradshaw's put a bounty on my head. $500, dead or alive. That's enough to make even good folks think twice about Christian charity. Mary Louise felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. $500 was a fortune in Redemption Creek, more than most folks saw in 5 years of honest work. Then we'll have to be careful, she said with more confidence than she felt. Ethan's eyebrows rose. Mary Louise, you've done more than enough. Once I can ride. You'll bleed to death on the trail, collapse from fever and let the buzzards pick your bones clean. She shook her head. No, Mr. Cole, you'll stay put until you're healed proper. Then, if you're so set on running, at least you'll have a fighting chance. Why? The question came out rough, almost desperate. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. I could be the villain in this story, not the hero. Mary Louise considered the question. Really considered it. Why was she risking everything for this stranger? It wasn't just Christian duty. She'd passed by plenty of folks in need without feeling this compulsion to help. It wasn't his looks, though she'd be lying if she said she hadn't noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled. Maybe because I'm tired of watching good people die for stupid reasons, she said finally. Maybe because when I pulled you from that river, I saw something in your eyes that reminded me of my father, that same stubborn refusal to let the world's cruelty make you cruel too. She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. Or maybe I'm just a foolish girl who reads too many novels and thinks she can save everyone. Not foolish, Ethan said quietly. Never foolish. Something passed between them in that moment, not quite understanding, not yet trust, but the possibility of both. Mary Louise felt it like a physical thing, fragile as spun glass and just as dangerous if it shattered. I'll bring more supplies tomorrow, she said, suddenly needing distance from those storm-gray eyes and what they made her feel. Try to rest, and don't even think about leaving. I'll hog to you to that cot if I have to. Yes, ma'am, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. As she slipped back into the darkness, Mary Louise tried to ignore the warmth that bloomed in her chest at that small sound. She had bigger worries than whatever was happening to her heart. The lean-to's supplies were running low. She'd need to raid her mother's pantry, maybe trade some of her father's fishing gear for medical supplies. And she'd have to be more careful about her comings and goings. Margaret Carter might be lost in grief. But she wasn't blind. What Mary Louise didn't know, couldn't know, was that her caution had already come too late. Earlier that evening, while she'd been tending Ethan's fever, Jebediah Morton had been sharing whiskey and gossip at the saloon. Saw the strangest thing, he'd said, words slurring slightly. The Carter girl, down by the river, looked like she was dragging something heavy toward that old lean-to Ben Carter used to use. Most of the men had ignored him. Jeb was known for tall tales and whiskey visions, but one man had listened with particular interest. Deputy Samuel Hicks had set down his glass and walked out without a word, his mind already working on how to word his telegram to Fort Grierson. As Mary Louise crept back to her room, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, indifferent to the human dramas playing out below, in the lean-to by the river. Ethan lay awake, his mind filled not with fever dreams, but with the image of a young woman's determined face and gentle hands. He'd been running for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to want to stay still. The Rio Grande continued its ancient song, carrying secrets and whispers toward the distant sea, and somewhere in the darkness, the wheels of fate ground slowly forward, bringing storm clouds that no amount of kindness could hold back. The whispers started small, like tumbleweeds gathering before a storm. Mary Louise first noticed them at Morrison's general store, where she'd gone to trade some of her father's fishing hooks for bandages and laudanum. Mrs. Morrison, usually chatty as a magpie, served her with tight-lipped efficiency, her eyes darting nervously to the other customers. "Everything all right, Mrs. Morrison?" Mary Louise asked, counting out her coins carefully. "Fine as rain, dear," the older woman replied, but her smile was strained. You be careful out there by the river. Heard tell there's been strangers about." Mary Louise kept her expression neutral, though her heart skipped. "I'll keep my eyes open." Outside, she nearly collided with Sheriff Doyle himself. The man was built like a whiskey barrel round, solid, and about as pleasant. His badge gleamed in the morning sun, polished to a shine that matched his expensive boots. Those boots, everyone knew, hadn't been bought on a sheriff's salary. "Miss Carter," he drawled, touching the brim of his hat. His smile didn't reach his eyes, never did. "Awful lot of time you're spending down by the river these days." "It's peaceful there," she replied, proud that her voice didn't waver. "Helps me think of my father." Doyle's pale eyes, the color of shallow water, studied her face. "Funny thing about that river, sometimes it washes up all manner of things. Troubles from upstream, you might say." "I wouldn't know about that. Sheriff—" "No, well, You hear anything interesting down there, you be sure to let me know." He leaned closer, and she could smell the tobacco and whiskey on his breath. "Good citizens look out for each other in Redemption Creek. Wouldn't want folks to get the wrong idea about where your loyalties lie." The threat was as subtle as a rattlesnake's warning, and just as dangerous. Mary Louise clutched her package tighter and forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "My loyalty is to what's right, Sheriff, same as my father's was." Something ugly flashed across Doyle's face. "Your father was a fool who didn't know when to mind his own business. I'd hate to see you follow in his footsteps." Heat flashed through Mary Louise's chest. But before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Mary Louise, there you are, child." Margaret Carter emerged from the millinery shop, her black mourning dress impeccable despite the dust. At 52, she still carried herself with the dignity of the schoolteacher she'd once been, though grief had etched new lines around her eyes and mouth. "Mother." Mary Louise moved to her side gratefully. Margaret's cool gaze swept over Doyle. "Sheriff, I trust you're not harassing my daughter." "Just passing the time of day. Mrs. Carter." Doyle's demeanor shifted, became more respectful. Even he wasn't quite bold enough to openly antagonize the widow of a murdered man. "Ladies." They watched him saunter away toward the saloon, no doubt to conduct his morning business with the various unsavory elements who paid him to look the other way. "What did he want?" Margaret asked once he was out of earshot. "Nothing important." Mary Louise lied. Her mother's sharp eyes missed nothing. "You've been distant lately, secretive. I may be grieving, Mary Louise, but I'm not blind. I just need time alone sometimes. Is that so wrong?" Margaret sighed. "No, child, but these are dangerous times. That man Doyle, he's not like your father. He doesn't believe in justice, only profit. And there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "Talk of a deserter, a dangerous man with a price on his head. They say he's wounded. Might be hiding somewhere nearby." Margaret gripped her daughter's arm. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me if you see anything suspicious, you'll come straight home." Mary Louise looked into her mother's worried eyes and felt the weight of her deception. But stronger still was the memory of Ethan's fevered rambling, his anguished cries about children he couldn't save. "I promise I'll be careful," she said, which wasn't quite the same thing as what her mother had asked. That afternoon, Mary Louise approached the lean-to with extra caution, taking a circuitous route and doubling back twice to ensure she wasn't followed. She found Ethan attempting to stand, one hand braced against the wall, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, setting down her supplies. "Trying to remember how legs work," he grunted. "Can't stay flat on my back forever." "You can and you will until those wounds heal proper." She moved to support him, and he reluctantly accepted her help back to the cot. "The whole town's buzzing about a dangerous deserter. Doyle practically accused me of harboring fugitives right there on Main Street." Ethan's expression darkened. "Doyle Sherman Doyle. You know him?" "Know of him. He's got connections all the way to Fort Grierson. Takes bribes from Bradshaw to keep the colonel informed about certain activities." He met her eyes grimly. "If Doyle's sniffing around, it won't be long before—" "Before nothing," Mary Louise interrupted. "We've come this far. We're not giving up now." "We again," Ethan murmured. "You keep saying we like we're partners in this." "Aren't we?" She began checking his bandages, pleased to see the wounds were finally starting to close properly. "You trusted me with your story. I'm trusting you with my safety. Seems like a partnership to me." His hand caught her wrist as she worked, his touch gentle but insistent. "Mary Louise, look at me." She did, and immediately wished she hadn't. This close, she could see flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could count the laugh lines that suggested he hadn't always worn such a grim expression. "If they catch you helping me, it won't just be your reputation at stake. Doyle's the type to make examples of people. Your mother— My mother is already broken, Mary Louise said quietly. She lost the man she loved to senseless violence. She goes through the motions of living, but the light's gone out of her. I can't just stand by and watch another good man die. Not when I can do something about it. I'm not a good man, Ethan said roughly. I've done things. In war, under orders. She pulled her hand free, busying herself with organizing the medical supplies. My father fought in the war between the states. He never talked about what he did there, but I saw how it haunted him. Good men sometimes have to do terrible things. What matters is whether they let it turn them into terrible men. And if the things I've seen and done have carved out so much of my soul, there's nothing good left. Mary Louise paused in her work, considering. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. Here. Ethan unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small, leather-bound book. What's this? My father's journal. He gave it to me before he died. Said it might help me understand why he was the way he was. She sat on her makeshift chair. Read it. Maybe you'll see that damage doesn't mean destroyed. He opened the journal, squinting at the cramped handwriting. As he read, his expression shifted surprise, understanding, something that might have been recognition. He writes about the burden of survival, Ethan said quietly, about coming home from war and finding he didn't fit anymore. But he did fit. Mary Louise insisted. He made a place for himself, built a life, a family. He chose love over bitterness. And look where it got him. Dead defending his principles. She lifted her chin. There are worse ways to go. Like dying slow from a poisoned soul. Drowning your conscience in whiskey until you can't remember why you ever cared about right and wrong. Ethan studied her face. You're not talking about your father now. Doyle was a different man once, before the money, before the corruption. My mother taught his children their letters. He used to bring his wife flowers every Sunday. She shrugged. People make choices, little compromises that seem harmless until one day you wake up and realize you've compromised yourself right into damnation. Speaking from experience. Speaking from observation. She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. I should go. Mother's expecting me to help with supper. But Ethan, yeah, whatever darkness you're carrying, it hasn't won yet. If it had, you wouldn't have warned those people. You wouldn't feel guilty about the ones you couldn't save. And you wouldn't be looking at me like you're afraid of contaminating me with your shadows. Maybe that's exactly why I should leave. And maybe that's exactly why you should stay. She left before he could respond. But not before she saw something shift in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore around his heart. The walk home seemed longer than usual, every shadow potentially hiding watching eyes. As she climbed the porch steps, Mary Louise found her mother waiting, a letter clutched in her hands. What is it? Mary Louise asked, alarmed by her mother's pallor. Thomas Brennan came by, Margaret said, naming the wealthy merchant who'd been pressuring them to sell the house. He's made another offer, a generous one. We're not selling. Mary Louise. Her mother's voice was tired. We can't keep living on pride and memories. The money your father left is almost gone. And now Thomas says if we're smart, we'll take his offer before circumstances change. What circumstances? Margaret looked away. He mentioned that Sheriff Doyle has taken an interest in our activities, suggested that it would be unfortunate if we were found to be unsuitable residents of Redemption Creek. Cold fury washed through Mary Louise. He's threatening us. He's a practical man who knows how the world works. Margaret's shoulders sagged. Perhaps we should consider— No. Mary Louise took her mother's hands. Father wouldn't want us to give in to bullies. Not Brennan, not Doyle, not anyone. Your father is dead, Margaret said sharply, then immediately softened. I'm sorry, I'm frightened. Mary Louise, for you, There's talk in town, ugly talk about girls who forget their place, who consort with dangerous men. I haven't forgotten my place, Mary Louise said firmly. My place is standing up for what's right, just like Daddy taught me. Margaret searched her daughter's face, then pulled her into a fierce embrace. You're so like him. Brave and stubborn and absolutely convinced the world can be better than it is. Because it can be, Mary Louise whispered into her mother's shoulder. It has to be. That night, as she lay in bed listening to her mother's restless pacing, Mary Louise wondered if she was being naive. The forces arraying against them were powerful money. Law and violence, all twisted together into a noose that was slowly tightening. But then she thought of Ethan reading her father's journal, of the way his fingers had trembled slightly as he turned the pages. She thought of children scattered to the desert winds because one man had chosen conscience over complicity. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd bring him clothes that didn't mark him as military. Maybe some of her father's things would fit. She'd need to figure out a way to get him a horse without raising suspicions. And she'd have to be more careful than ever. Doyle wasn't the type to give many warnings. Outside, a storm was building over the mountains, lightning flickering in the distance like signal fires. The air smelled of rain and change, of endings and beginnings twisted together like prairie grass. In the lean-to by the river, Ethan Cole sat up through the long hours, reading by candlelight about a man who'd carried his own darkness and found a way through to something like peace. When he finally closed the journal, his eyes were dry but burning. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think beyond the next sunrise, beyond the next mile of hard running. He thought about gray-green eyes that saw too much and forgave it anyway. He thought about hands that healed instead of harmed. He thought about what it might mean to stop running, even if stopping meant making a stand that could destroy the fragile hope growing between two wounded souls in a hard land. The storm broke just before dawn, washing the desert clean and leaving the air sharp with the scent of creosote and new possibilities. But storms, as anyone in Redemption Creek could tell you, had a way of washing up more than just hope. Sometimes they revealed things better left buried. The moon hung full and bright over the Rio Grande, turning the water to molten silver. Mary Louise sat on the riverbank, her bare feet trailing in the cool current, waiting. She'd left a note in the lean-to earlier. Meet me where we first met. When the moon is highest, we need to talk. She heard him before she saw him. The slight favoring of his left side made his gait distinctive. Ethan emerged from the cottonwoods like a shadow given form, moving with the careful grace of a man who'd learned that survival often depended on silence. You shouldn't be out here, he said, but he sat down beside her anyway, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. It's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous, Mary Louise replied. She'd worn her best dress, the blue calico that brought out her eyes, though she told herself it was merely because it was clean. But some things can't be said in hiding. What needs saying? She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, his features seemed softer. The harsh lines of pain and paranoia smoothed away. He'd been healing well these past 2 weeks, well enough that she knew their time was running short. You're planning to leave, she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan's jaw tightened. My strength is back. Staying longer only puts you in more danger. And going puts you in danger. Doyle's men are watching all the roads out of town. They know you're here somewhere, just not where. I've slipped through tighter nets. Not with 3 barely healed bullet wounds, you haven't. She pulled her feet from the water, tucking them beneath her skirts. I have a better idea. Mary Louise. Just listen. She held up a hand. There's a freight wagon leaving for El Paso in 3 days. The driver, Samuel Washington, owes my father a debt Daddy saved his son from drowning 2 summers back. He'd hide you in his cargo, get you far enough away that you could disappear properly. And what about you once I'm gone and Doyle figures out who helped me? He won't figure it out if we're careful. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't know men like Doyle. He'll tear this town apart looking for someone to blame. And a young woman with a reputation for kindness, who's been acting strange lately, spending time by the river. He shook his head. He'll put it together. Then I'll face that when it comes. No! The word came out sharp, almost angry. You won't sacrifice yourself for me. Isn't that my choice to make? Not when I'm the cause of it. He stood abruptly, pacing to the water's edge. I should have kept riding that night, should have let the river take me. Would have been cleaner for everyone. Mary Louise rose and followed him, her bare feet silent on the sandy bank. Do you really believe that? It would have been easier. Easier isn't always right. She touched his arm gently, felt the tension thrumming through him like a plucked wire. You told me you saved those people because it was right, even though it cost you everything. Why is it so hard to believe someone might make the same choice for you? He turned to her then, and something in his expression made her heart stutter. Because I've seen what happens to good people who get too close to men like me. They end up buried in unmarked graves, or worse, they end up alive but wishing they weren't. I'm stronger than you think. I know exactly how strong you are. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with aching gentleness. That's what terrifies me. The space between them seemed to collapse, drawn tight by forces neither fully understood. Mary Louise found herself swaying toward him, her hands coming to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating fierce and fast. Ethan, she whispered. I'm no good for you, he said roughly, but his other hand had found her waist, drawing her closer. I'm a wanted man with more blood on my hands than you can imagine. I've got nothing to offer but danger and sorrow. I'm not asking for offers. She looked up at him, letting him see everything she'd been trying to hide. I'm not some foolish girl who thinks love conquers all. I know what you are, what you've done. I know the risk. But these past weeks, watching you fight through fever and pain, seeing the man beneath the soldier, I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. Mary Louise. Her name was prayer and curse combined. You deserve better. You deserve a man who can court you proper, give you a home, children, a life without looking over your shoulder. Maybe, she agreed. But that's not who I found bleeding in my river, is it? His control broke like a dam giving way. His mouth found hers with desperate hunger, weeks of tension and denial pouring into the kiss. Mary Louise had been kissed before chaste pecks from boys at church socials. But this was something else entirely. This was fire and need and the sharp edge of sorrow all wrapped together. Her hands tangled in his hair, holding him close as he deepened the kiss. She could taste the wildness in him, the barely leashed violence that he'd turned to protection instead of destruction. When his lips moved to her throat, she gasped, her knees going weak. Wait. He murmured against her skin, though his arms tightened around her. We should stop. You're untouched. Innocent. I'm a woman who knows her own mind, she interrupted, pulling back to meet his eyes. Yes, I'm untouched. I've been waiting not for marriage or propriety, but for something that mattered. Someone who mattered. This isn't how it should be. You by a river in the dark with a hunted man. Nothing about my life is how it should be, she said simply. My father should be alive. We shouldn't be threatened by corrupt lawmen. The world shouldn't be so broken that good men have to run for choosing mercy over orders. She touched his face, tracing the scar that marked him. But this is what we have. This moment, this choice. If we do this, Ethan said slowly, I can't promise you tomorrow. I can't promise you anything beyond tonight. I'm not asking for promises. She smiled, sad and sweet. I'm asking you to stop running, just for tonight, to let yourself have this one thing that's good and real before the world intrudes again. He studied her face in the moonlight, searching for doubt or fear, finding none. He made his choice. His hands were infinitely gentle as he spread his coat on the soft sand beneath the cottonwoods. creating a bower in the shadows where the moon painted everything in silver and secrets. "Are you sure?" he asked one more time. Instead of answering with words, Mary Louise began unbuttoning her dress with steady fingers. The blue calico pooled at her feet, and she stood before him in her simple white shift, vulnerable but unashamed. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Ethan breathed. And she believed him because his eyes held the kind of reverence men usually reserved for churches. What followed was gentle, despite the desperation. Tender, despite the hunger. Ethan's hands shook as they mapped the territory of her skin, as if she were something precious he was afraid of breaking. Mary Louise discovered that passion could be both fierce and careful, that a man's strength could be channeled into worship rather than conquest. When the sharp pain of her innocence gave way to something deeper and sweeter, she understood why the poets wrote so much about love and death together. This felt like both a dying of her old self and a birth of something new, dangerous and glorious combined. After, they lay entwined on his coat, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers combed through her hair, which had come loose from its pins to spill across his skin like dark silk. "I love you," she said quietly, not needing him to say it back, just needing the words to exist in the world. His arms tightened around her. "Mary Louise." "Shh," she pressed a finger to his lips. "I know, you can't say it. You think it'll make leaving harder, but I needed you to know that whatever happens, this wasn't just loneliness or gratitude or the moon making me foolish. This was love, pure and simple." "Nothing about this is simple," he said roughly. "No," she agreed. "But the love is... everything else is complicated. But the love, that's the one clean thing in all this mess." They dressed slowly, reluctant to break the spell. Ethan helped her with her buttons, his fingers lingering on each one. When she was proper again, no one would know what had transpired except for the slight swelling of her lips and the new knowledge in her eyes. 3 days, she said. "The freight wagon leaves at dawn in 3 days. Promise me you'll take it." "And you?" "I'll be fine. Doyle suspects, but he can't prove anything. And once you're gone safe, there's nothing he can do to me that matters." Ethan caught her shoulders. "Promise me something in return. If things go bad, if Doyle comes after you, run. There's a mission in Santa Fe. Sister Catherine. Tell her I sent you. She'll help." "I won't need." "Promise me?" She saw the anguish in his eyes and relented. "I promise." He walked her back toward town, stopping at the edge of the settlement where lamplight began to push back the darkness. One last kiss, fierce and brief, and then she was walking away, forcing herself not to look back. Mary Louise slipped into her house silent as a ghost, but she found her mother sitting in the parlor, a single candle burning. "You were with him," Margaret said. It wasn't a question. Mary Louise lifted her chin. "Yes." "Oh, my dear girl." Her mother's voice held sorrow but no condemnation. "Do you love him?" "Yes." Margaret sighed. "Your father would have liked him. I think Ben always did admire men who chose conscience over comfort." She studied her daughter's face. "You've given him everything, haven't you?" Heat rose in Mary Louise's cheeks, but she didn't deny it. "Then we'd best start planning," Margaret said briskly. "If you're anything like me, and Lord knows you are, you'll be wanting to follow him when he goes." "Mother, Did you think I'd let you face this alone? I lost your father to violence. I won't lose you to shame." Margaret stood, suddenly looking younger, more like the woman who'd faced down bandits with a shotgun when they'd first arrived in Redemption Creek. "We'll let Brennan buy the house, take the money and make our own fresh start. California, perhaps, or Oregon. Somewhere Doyle's reach doesn't extend. You'd do that, leave everything." "Everything that mattered in this town died with your father," Margaret said simply. "You're all I have left that counts. If following your heart means leaving, then we leave together." Mary Louise threw her arms around her mother, tears finally coming. They clung to each other in the candlelight. Two women bound by love and loss and the courage to begin again. Outside, the moon continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But down by the river, in the shadows of the cottonwoods, the sand still held the impression of two bodies intertwined, a temporary testament to love found and claimed against all odds and wisdom. 3 days. They had 3 days to arrange a miracle, to orchestrate escape and new beginnings. It should have been enough. It wasn't. The storm came 2 days early, both the one in the sky and the one wearing badges. Mary Louise woke to thunder rattling the windows and her mother shaking her shoulder urgently. "They're here," Margaret whispered. "Doyle and a group of soldiers. They're searching every building in town." Mary Louise was out of bed and pulling on her dress before her mother finished speaking. Through the window, she could see torches moving through the pre-dawn darkness despite the rain, hear the crash of doors being kicked open. "I have to warn him," she said, fingers fumbling with buttons. "It's too late." Margaret gripped her daughter's shoulders. "They'll be watching the river. You'll never make it." But Mary Louise was already moving, snatching her father's old cavalry pistol from the drawer where they'd kept it hidden. The weight of it felt wrong in her hands, but she tucked it into her skirts anyway. "Mary Louise, no." "Pack what you can carry," she told her mother. "Take Brennan's offer if you can get to him. Meet me at the Santa Fe Road by sunset. If I'm not there," she swallowed hard. "If I'm not there, go anyway. I won't leave without you." "You will." Mary Louise kissed her mother's cheek. "Promise me." Margaret's face crumpled, but she nodded. "Go. Use the back stairs." The rain hit like cold needles as Mary Louise slipped out the rear door. The town was chaos soldiers everywhere, Doyle's voice booming orders above the storm. She kept to the shadows, moving toward the river by memory more than sight. She was almost to the path when a hand caught her arm. She spun, hand going to the hidden pistol, but stopped when she recognized Samuel Washington's weathered face. "Girl, what are you doing out in this?" the freighter demanded. There's something I need to do." His eyes narrowed, taking in her wild appearance, the desperation in her face. "This about that wounded fellow you've been tending." Mary Louise's heart stopped. "I don't know what you—" "Save it. Half the town knows. Other half suspects." Samuel glanced around, then pulled her into the shelter of his wagon. "Listen quick. Doyle's got men covering every approach to the river, but there's an old Apache trail. Follows the canyon wall. Comes out near that lean-to of your daddy's." "Why are you helping me?" "Your father saved my boy. Man saves your child. You don't forget." He pressed something into her hand, a cavalry whistle. 3 short blasts if you need help. I got men owe me favors." Mary Louise squeezed his hand gratefully, then plunged back into the storm. The Apache trail was treacherous in good weather. In the rain, it was nearly suicidal. She slipped twice, caught herself on thorny mesquite, tore her dress on sharp rocks. But she made it, dropping down near the lean-to, muddy and bleeding, but alive. "Ethan!" she burst through the canvas flap. He was already armed and dressed, obviously alerted by the commotion. "You shouldn't have come." "They know. Doyle and—" She gasped for breath. "Soldiers from Fort Grierson. They're searching everywhere." His face went hard. "How many?" "At least 12, maybe more." Ethan strapped on his gun belt with practiced efficiency. "Can you ride?" "Yes, but—" He was already moving, pulling aside a canvas tarp to reveal a saddled horse, one she recognized as belonging to Jake Morrison from the general store. "Borrowed," Ethan said dryly. "Figured it might come to this." "There's only one horse." "You're taking it." He grabbed her shoulders. "Ride hard for Santa Fe. Don't stop. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "Mary Louise." "No." She pulled out her father's pistol. "We go together or not at all." Something flickered in his eyes: pride, fear, love, all tangled together. "Stubborn woman! You knew what I was when you—" Thunder crashed, drowning her words. When it passed, she could hear something worse: voices, getting closer. "The canyon," Ethan said. "If we can make it to Devil's Canyon, we might lose them in the maze." They ran, Ethan leading the horse while Mary Louise clutched his free hand. The rain had turned the ground to thick mud that sucked at their feet. Behind them, shouts erupted. They'd been spotted. There, by the rocks, gunfire cracked through the storm. Ethan shoved Mary Louise behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. "Stay down." He returned fire, the muzzle flash of his revolver lighting his face in harsh strobes. Mary Louise peered around the rock and saw them: soldiers in blue, Doyle's men in civilian clothes, all converging on their position. "Ethan Cole," Doyle's voice boomed across the distance. "Surrender now and the girl goes free." "Like hell," Mary Louise muttered, raising her own pistol. "You don't know how to—" Ethan began. She fired, the kick nearly knocking her down. A man cried out and dove for cover. Ethan stared at her. "Your father teach you that?" "He taught me lots of things." She fired again, forcing their attackers to keep their heads down. They retreated slowly, using rocks and scrub for cover, trading shots with their pursuers. The horse, terrified by the gunfire, had bolted into the storm. Their ammunition wouldn't last long, and they both knew it. This way, Mary Louise spotted a narrow crack in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for a person. "Daddy showed me this once. It leads to the old mine shaft." They squeezed through, the rough stone tearing at clothes and skin. Behind them, Doyle's curses echoed off the canyon walls. The passage was too narrow for pursuit. They'd have to go around. The mine shaft was a black mouth in the cliff face, abandoned for decades after the silver played out. They stumbled inside, grateful for even temporary shelter. "We can't stay here," Ethan said, checking his ammunition. 3 bullets left. "There's another exit," Mary Louise said. "Comes out near Skeleton Ridge. But Ethan—" She hesitated. "It's underwater. The shaft flooded years ago. We'd have to swim through. No way to know if we'd make it." He looked at her, rain and blood streaking her face, her dress torn and muddy, still clutching her father's pistol like salvation itself. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For all of this, you deserved better than—" She kissed him, fierce and quick. "Stop apologizing for giving me the only real thing in my life. Now come on." Deeper into the mine they went, the sound of pursuit growing closer. The flooded section loomed before them, black water of unknown depth. "Together," Mary Louise said, taking his hand. "Together," he agreed. They plunged in. The water was ice cold, stealing breath and strength. Mary Louise kicked hard, Ethan beside her, both fighting against the weight of waterlogged clothes. Her lungs burned. Spots danced before her eyes. Just when she thought she couldn't make it, they burst through into air, gasping and choking on the other side. They dragged themselves onto dry rock, shivering violently. "We made it," Mary Louise laughed, half hysterical. "We actually—" Light blazed in their faces. They'd emerged not at Skeleton Ridge but into a wider chamber where Doyle and 6 men waited, having taken the dry route around. Well, well, Doyle's smile was ugly with triumph. The lovebirds, how touching. Ethan moved to shield Mary Louise, but there was nowhere to go. They were surrounded, exhausted, nearly out of ammunition. "Here's what's going to happen," Doyle said conversationally. "Cole here's going to hang for desertion and murder, yes. We'll find some murders to pin on him. And Miss Carter," his pale eyes glittered, "aiding a deserter, offering comfort to the enemy, behaving like a common—" "Sheriff Doyle." A new voice echoed through the chamber. Colonel Bradshaw stepped from the shadows, his uniform immaculate despite the storm. "I'll handle this," Mary Louise had never seen the man Ethan had defied, but she recognized the type cold, calculating, utterly convinced of his own righteousness. "Sergeant Cole," Bradshaw said, "you've led us quite a chase." "Not sergeant anymore," Ethan replied. "You saw to that." "You saw to that when you chose savages over your own kind." Bradshaw studied Mary Louise with distaste, and corrupted this young woman in the process. "The only corruption here is you," Mary Louise spat. "Murdering innocents and calling it duty." Bradshaw backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. Ethan lunged for him with a snarl, but 3 men clubbed him down. "Enough," Bradshaw said. "Doyle, you'll be well compensated for your assistance. Take the girl back to town. I'm sure you can find appropriate charges." "No," Ethan struggled against the men holding him. "We had a deal. You said she'd go free." "I said nothing of the kind." Doyle smirked. "Though I might be persuaded to go easy on her. She's young, pretty. I'm sure we could come to an arrangement." The implications in his tone made Mary Louise's skin crawl. She saw the same recognition in Ethan's eyes, saw something break inside him. "Please," he said, and she'd never heard him beg before. "Do whatever you want of me. Just let her go." "Actually," a woman's voice rang through the chamber, "you'll be letting them both go." Everyone turned. Margaret Carter stood at the chamber entrance, and she wasn't alone. Samuel Washington was beside her, along with Doc Morrison, Jake Morrison, and a dozen other townspeople, all armed, all aiming at Doyle and Bradshaw. "Mother," Mary Louise gasped. "I told you I wouldn't leave without you." Margaret's rifle never wavered from Doyle's chest. "Seems half the town feels the same way." "This is federal business," Bradshaw sputtered. "We're interfering with a corrupt sheriff and a murderer in uniform." Doc Morrison said, "Been documenting Doyle's crimes for months now. Got enough evidence to see him hang twice over. As for you, Colonel, well, massacring civilians ain't looked on kindly. Even out here. You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can." Samuel Washington smiled grimly. "See, one of them kickapoo you tried to slaughter my wife's cousin. He's been safe at my place, willing to testify about what really happened, what you ordered." The standoff stretched taut, 13 townspeople against 7 soldiers and corrupt lawmen. The math wasn't hard. "This won't end here," Bradshaw warned. "No," Margaret agreed. "It'll end in a courtroom, with you answering for your crimes, or it'll end right here with bloodshed. Your choice, Colonel." Slowly, reluctantly, Bradshaw nodded to his men, weapons lowered. "Wise choice," Margaret said. "Now march, nice and easy. We'll escort you to the edge of town. You can explain to your superiors how a bunch of shopkeepers and housewives got the drop on the mighty cavalry." As they filed out, Doyle passed close to Mary Louise. "This isn't over, girl." Ethan, bloodied but unbound now, stepped between them. "Yes, it is. You come near her again, and I'll kill you. That's not a threat, Sheriff. That's a promise." Something in his eyes must have convinced Doyle, because the sheriff hurried after Bradshaw without another word. When they were gone, Mary Louise threw herself into her mother's arms, then Ethan's, laughing and crying simultaneously. "How?" was all she could manage. "Samuel came to the house after you left," Margaret explained. "Said if Ben Carter's girl was in trouble, it was the town's trouble. Word spread quick. Turns out, folks are tired of Doyle's corruption. Your father was well loved. Mary Louise, that love extends to you. And to the man who stood up for what's right," Doc Morrison added, offering Ethan his hand. "Welcome to Redemption Creek, son. Properly this time." The storm was breaking when they emerged from the mine, sunlight piercing the clouds in golden shafts. The town that had seemed so hostile just hours before now felt like sanctuary. "It's not over," Ethan warned quietly as they walked. "Bradshaw will be back with more men. Federal marshals, maybe." "Then we'd best make sure you're long gone before that happens," Margaret said practically. "California sounds nice this time of year. I hear there's good farmland near Sacramento." Ethan looked between mother and daughter. "You didn't think I'd let my daughter run off with a strange man unchaperoned? Did you?" Margaret's eyes twinkled. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you make an honest woman of her." Mary Louise blushed scarlet, but Ethan just laughed the first real laugh she'd heard from him. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I believe that can be arranged." As they walked back toward town, the people of Redemption Creek flanking them like an honor guard, Mary Louise thought about the price of conscience, the weight of choice. Her father had died for his principles. Ethan had lost everything for his, but here, in the aftermath of storm and violence, she saw that sometimes principle could triumph, if enough good people stood together. "No regrets?" Ethan asked quietly, his hand finding hers. She thought of all she was leaving behind her father's grave, the house where she'd grown up, the life she'd planned. Then she looked at the man beside her, battered but unbowed, and the mother who'd chosen love over safety. "No regrets," she said, and meant it. Behind them, Redemption Creek began the slow work of cleaning up after the storm. Ahead, the road stretched westward, toward new territories and new chances. They'd leave at sunset, Mary Louise decided. After all, the best beginnings came with the ending of one day and the promise of another. And somewhere in California, beside a different river under different stars, they'd build something new from the ashes of what was a testament to the power of love and conscience in a hard land that tried to kill both. The respite was shorter than anyone hoped. 3 days after the standoff at the mine, as the town prepared for the Carter family's departure, riders appeared on the eastern horizon. Not soldiers this time, hired guns. The kind of men who sold their skills to whoever paid highest. Doyle had returned, and he'd brought an army. Mary Louise was helping her mother pack the last of their belongings when Jake Morrison burst through their door, face flushed with urgency. "They're back," he gasped. 15, maybe 20 men, professional killers by the look of them. Through the window, Mary Louise could see them spreading through town like a plague, taking strategic positions. These weren't frustrated soldiers following orders. These were men who enjoyed their work. "Where's Ethan?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be bad. "Went to the blacksmith's to settle accounts. They've got him cornered there with Samuel." Without thinking, Mary Louise grabbed her father's pistol and headed for the door. Margaret caught her arm. "You can't face them all. I can't let him face them alone either." She looked at her mother steadily. "This is my fight too." Margaret studied her daughter's face, then nodded slowly. "Then we face it together. Jake, ring the church bell. Let everyone know Redemption Creek stands together or falls together." The bell's bronze voice rang out across the desert, urgent and demanding. As Mary Louise and Margaret hurried toward Main Street, doors opened and people emerged, some armed, some not, but all determined. The town that had found its courage 3 days ago wasn't ready to surrender it. At the blacksmith shop, Ethan and Samuel had overturned wagons and anvils, creating makeshift cover. They were pinned down, taking fire from 3 directions. Doyle stood in the center of the street like he owned it, which he had for too long. "Come out, Cole," he shouted. "Face justice like a man." "Your justice comes from a hired gun," Ethan called back. "What happened to the law you swore to uphold?" "Law's what I say it is in this town." Doyle's laugh was ugly. "Always has been. Your girl and her daddy just refused to see it." The mention of her father sent rage flooding through Mary Louise. Before anyone could stop her, she stepped into the open. "My father saw exactly what you were," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "A small man made smaller by corruption. Doyle's face darkened. "Get off the street, girl, before—" His words cut off as a bullet kicked up dust at his feet. Mary Louise hadn't fired. The shot came from the roof of Morrison's store, where Doc Morrison crouched with a rifle. "That's a warning," the doctor called down. "Next one won't miss." "You people have lost your minds," Doyle snarled. "You think you can stand against professional killers?" "We think we're tired of living under your boot," someone called from the gathering crowd. The standoff stretched taut. The hired guns looked uncertain they'd been paid to hunt one man, not face down an entire town, but they were professionals. They wouldn't back down easily. Then one of them made a fatal mistake, whether from nerves or bloodlust. A gunman near the saloon fired at the crowd. His bullet caught Mrs. Peterson in the shoulder, sending the elderly seamstress spinning to the ground. The town erupted. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. 20 hired killers found themselves facing 60 angry townspeople who'd found their courage and weren't giving it back. Gunfire crackled from windows, doorways, and rooftops. The professionals had skill, but the locals had knowledge of every corner, every sight line. Mary Louise found herself beside Ethan, both of them firing from behind an overturned wagon. His presence steadied her, even as bullets whined overhead. "You should be somewhere safe," he said between shots. "So should you," she retorted, then yelped as a bullet splintered wood inches from her face. Ethan's return fire was swift and deadly. The man who'd shot at her crumpled in the street. "Nobody," Ethan growled, "shoots at my woman." Despite everything, Mary Louise felt warmth bloom in her chest at those words. His woman. After everything, they might actually have a chance at Mary Louise down. She dropped instinctively as Ethan shoved her aside. The knife meant for her heart caught him in the ribs instead, thrown by a gunman who'd crept close in the chaos. "No!" Mary Louise caught him as he staggered, blood already seeping between his fingers where he clutched the wound. The knife thrower advanced, drawing another blade, but never got to use it. Margaret Carter's shotgun boomed, and the man flew backward into the dust. "Nobody," Margaret said calmly, echoing Ethan's earlier words, "hurts my children." The battle raged on. But Mary Louise's world had shrunk to the man bleeding in her arms. The knife was still in him. Pulling it out would make the bleeding worse. "Hold on," she begged. "Just hold on." "Listen," Ethan gasped, his hand finding hers. "If I don't—" "Don't you dare!" Tears streamed down her face. "Don't you dare leave me now. We're supposed to go to California. Build a life. You promised." "Stubborn woman," he managed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Always making a man keep his word. Around them, the tide was turning. The hired guns, faced with unexpected resistance and mounting losses, began to fall back. Doyle screamed orders, but fear had broken their discipline. Then, above the gunfire, came a new sound, the cavalry bugles. Everyone froze as blue-coated soldiers thundered into town, but instead of supporting Doyle, they began disarming the hired guns. A young captain dismounted, his face grim with purpose. "Sheriff Doyle, by order of the territorial governor, you're under arrest for corruption, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder." "This is a mistake," Doyle protested. "These people are harboring a deserter." "The only mistake," the captain said, "was letting you operate unchecked for so long. As for Sergeant Cole, Colonel Bradshaw has been relieved of command pending investigation into the massacre of civilians. Several officers have come forward with testimony about his illegal orders. Any charges against Cole have been dropped." Mary Louise barely heard any of it. Ethan's breathing was getting shallower, his skin going pale beneath its tan. "Doctor!" she screamed. "We need the doctor." Doc Morrison was already pushing through the crowd, medical bag in hand. He took one look at the knife placement, and his face went grim. "Get him to my office. Quickly now." They carried Ethan on a makeshift stretcher. Mary Louise never letting go of his hand. In the doctor's office, she was pushed aside as Morrison and his assistant went to work. "Wait outside," the doctor ordered. "No." "Mary Louise, I can't work with you." "I stay," she said flatly. "He stays conscious better when I'm here. You know it's true." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded curtly. "Hold his hand, then. Keep him talking." What followed was the longest hour of Mary Louise's life. The knife had gone deep, nicking organs that bled treacherously. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about rivers and children saved and Mary Louise's eyes in the moonlight. "Stay with me," she whispered, over and over. "Please stay with me." His eyes found hers, focusing with effort. "Not going anywhere. Too stubborn to die now." "That's right," she said fiercely. "You're too stubborn and too ornery, and I love you too much to let you go." "Love you too." He breathed, and her heart clenched because he'd never said it before. "Should have said it sooner." "You can say it every day in California," she told him. "Every morning when you wake up and every night before bed. You can say it until I'm sick of hearing it." "Never be sick of it." Morrison worked with steady hands, stitching internal damage, fighting to stop the bleeding. The afternoon sun slanted through windows, marking time in golden inches. Finally, exhausted, the doctor stepped back. "I've done what I can. The next 24 hours will tell." "Will he?" "He's strong. He's got reasons to fight." Morrison squeezed her shoulder gently. "Stay with him. Sometimes love is the best medicine we have." Mary Louise pulled a chair close to the bed, determined to keep vigil. Margaret brought food she couldn't eat, water she sipped mechanically. The town was quiet now, Doyle and his surviving men in custody, the dead being prepared for burial. Through it all, she held Ethan's hand, talking when he was conscious, singing when he wasn't. She told him about the farm they'd have in California, the children who'd run barefoot through orange groves. She painted a future in words, willing him to want it enough to fight for it. The fever came with nightfall, as Morrison had warned it might. Ethan thrashed and muttered, reliving battles both old and new. Mary Louise bathed his face with cool cloths, her mother helping when her own hands shook too badly. "He's a fighter," Margaret said softly, "like someone else I know." "What if he doesn't?" "Then you'll survive. You'll grieve and rage and want to die, but you'll survive. That's what we do. We Carter women. We endure." "I don't want to just endure," Mary Louise whispered. "I want to live with him." "Then make him fight for it. Remind him what he's fighting for." As dawn approached, Ethan's fever broke. His breathing deepened, became less labored. When his eyes opened, they were clear and focused. "Mary Louise." "I'm here." She squeezed his hand, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I'm right here." "Did we win?" "We won. Doyle's arrested. The hired guns are dead or captured. You're free. Ethan, really free." He studied her face, then smiled a real smile, without shadows or sorrow. "No, not free. Never was until I met you." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Bound now, but it's a binding I choose." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Cole?" "It's a promise, Miss Carter. Soon as I can stand, I'm making an honest woman of you. Your mother insists." "Just my mother." "Well," he said, his voice growing stronger, "I might have some personal interest in the matter, too." She laughed, the sound bright as the new day dawning outside. They'd won more than just a gunfight. They'd won the right to that future she'd painted in desperate words through the long night. Redemption Creek had lived up to its name at last. It had redeemed itself from years of corruption, and in doing so, had redeemed two wounded souls who'd found each other by a river where virgin hopes had waited to be transformed by hands that promised tomorrow. The road to California still beckoned, but it no longer felt like escape. Now it was simply the next chapter in a story that had begun with blood and water and would always end with love. The user wants me to write part 7 of the story following the outline. Looking at the outline, part 7 is titled How Kwa Vasu Luachan Consequences and Choice with these key points. The town doesn't forgive Mary. Her house is confiscated. She is shunned. Ethan wants to take her away to the mountains where there's no human law. Character development. Mary is no longer the trembling girl by the river. She accepts loss to keep love and freedom. Humanistic message. Western women don't just wait. They choose. Dare to stand up and dare to love. I need to write this section showing the aftermath of the battle. The town turning against Mary despite their victory. And the difficult choices they must make. This should be 2,000 to 2,500 words in English. The victory celebration was short-lived. Within days of Doyle's arrest, the good citizens of Redemption Creek remembered their propriety. Mary Louise first noticed the change at Sunday service, where pews that had welcomed her family for years suddenly had no room. Whispers followed her like tumbleweeds, and eyes that had shown gratitude now held judgment. She lived with him by the river. Mrs. Henderson hissed to her daughter, loud enough to carry, unchaperoned, for weeks. Shameless, came the response. And her poor mother, having to bear such disgrace. Mary Louise kept her head high as she walked past, but each word stung like a scorpion. Beside her, Margaret's jaw was set in a hard line. Pay them no mind, her mother murmured. Hypocrites, the lot of them. But the whispers were just the beginning. Thomas Brennan arrived at their door the next morning, accompanied by Judge Whitmore and 2 men Mary Louise didn't recognize. Mrs. Carter. Miss Carter, Brennan said, his smile as oily as his hair. I'm afraid we have some unfortunate business to discuss. State your business, then, Margaret said coldly, not inviting them in. It's about your late husband's debts, Judge Whitmore said, producing a sheaf of papers. It seems there were irregularities in the documentation, loans that weren't properly recorded until now. Mary Louise felt her stomach drop. What loans? My father paid cash for everything? Not according to these documents. Brennan said smoothly, signed and witnessed. I'm afraid the estate owes considerable sums, more than the value of this property. In fact, those are forgeries. Mary Louise stepped forward, but her mother caught her arm. Can you prove that? Whitmore asked. Because these gentlemen have sworn affidavits saying otherwise. It was a sham, transparent as glass, but legal enough in a town where justice had been for sale so long, with Doyle gone. Brennan was moving quickly to claim what he'd always wanted. How long do we have? Margaret asked quietly. I'm a reasonable man. Brennan said, 2 weeks to settle affairs, unless... He looked at Mary Louise with calculating eyes. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. A young woman of your experience might find work in one of my establishments. The implication was clear. Mary Louise's hand went to her father's pistol, still carried in her pocket, but Ethan's voice stopped her. Touch her and I'll kill you! He stood in the doorway, still pale and moving carefully, but the threat in his voice was real as death. Samuel Washington flanked him, along with several other men from the fight. Mr. Cole, Brennan said nervously, this is a legal matter. Nothing about this is legal, Ethan said flatly. But you're right about one thing. The Carters are leaving Redemption Creek. By choice. Ethan, Mary Louise started, but he shook his head slightly. 2 weeks is more than generous, he continued. They'll take what's theirs and go. But if anyone harasses them in that time, if a single word is said against their honor, I'll take it personal. We clear. Brennan's face flushed, but he nodded, even freed of charges. Ethan Cole was not a man to cross lightly. After they left, Mary Louise sank onto the porch steps. We're losing everything." "No," Ethan said, sitting carefully beside her. "Just a house, wood and nails and bad memories. It's where I grew up, where my father—" "Your father is in your heart, not these walls," Margaret said firmly. "Though I'd like to shoot Brennan on principle." "Get in line," Samuel muttered. That evening, as they sorted through possessions, deciding what to take and what to leave, Ethan pulled Mary Louise aside. "There's another option," he said quietly. "The mountains. I know places where the law doesn't reach, where we could disappear, build something away from all this." "Run away, Hyde." "Start fresh," he corrected. "No judgment, no whispers, no one telling us how to live." Mary Louise looked around the room at her mother carefully packing her father's books, at the quilt her grandmother had made, at all the tangible pieces of a life built over years. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "To hide in the mountains like outlaws?" "I want you safe," he said simply. "Happy, free from all this poison." She studied his face, seeing the fear there not for himself, but for her. This man who'd faced down armies was terrified of what cruel words might do to her spirit. "I'm not made of spun glass. Ethan Cole," she said. "I won't break from gossip." "But you shouldn't have to bear it, not because of me." "I'm bearing it because of my choices," she corrected. "I chose to save you. I chose to love you. I chose to give myself to you by that river. And I'd choose it again. Every whisper, every turned back, every lost thing is worth what we found." He caught her face between his hands. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She covered his hands with hers. "But I won't hide. We'll go to California like we planned, build that farm, face the world together, not run from it." "Mary Louise Carter, you are the bravest damn woman I've ever known." "Language, Mr. Cole," she said primly, then ruined it by grinning. "Save that talk for after the wedding." Over the next week, the town's judgment grew sharper. Mary Louise found doors closed to her. Credit refused at stores where her family had traded for years. Someone painted Jezebel on their fence in red paint. Margaret's students were pulled from her tutoring, parents claiming they couldn't have their children taught by a woman who'd raised such a daughter. The cruelest blow came from Reverend Mills, who arrived to inform them they were no longer welcome at church. "It pains me to say this," he intoned, not looking pained at all. "But the congregation feels your presence would be disruptive to worship." "You mean my presence reminds them of their cowardice," Mary Louise said evenly. "When Doyle was terrorizing this town, where was the congregation when my father was murdered in the street? Where were their Christian principles?" "Young woman, your situation—" "My situation is that I helped save this town from itself, and now that same town wants to pretend I'm the sinner." She laughed bitterly. "Maybe you should preach on that next Sunday, Reverend, about casting first stones." He left quickly, face flushed. Margaret put an arm around her daughter. "You're becoming quite fierce," she observed. "I'm becoming tired of hypocrites." Mary Louise looked at her mother. "Are you ashamed of me? Tell me truly." "Ashamed?" Margaret cupped her daughter's face. "You followed your heart. You saved a good man. You stood up to corruption when grown men cowered. If that brings shame, then I'll wear it proudly." Ethan recovered steadily, though he chafed at the restrictions. Doc Morrison had to threaten to tie him to the bed to keep him from overdoing. But finally, 10 days after the fight, he was cleared to travel. The morning of their departure came gray and cool, unusual for the desert. Their belongings were loaded onto Samuel's wagon. He'd insisted on driving them to the rail station in Las Cruces, saying it was the least he could do. As they prepared to leave, a surprise awaited. Not everyone in Redemption Creek had forgotten courage. A small group gathered Doc Morrison, the Washingtons, Jake from the store, and a handful of others who'd fought beside them. "Wanted to see you off proper," Doc said gruffly, "and give you this." He handed Ethan an envelope. Letters of recommendation, from those of us who know what really happened here. Might help you get established in California. Also this, Jake's wife added, pressing a wrapped package into Mary Louise's hands. Your grandmother's china. I bought it when Brennan was selling off your things. Didn't seem right for it to go to strangers. Mary Louise hugged her, tears threatening. These small kindnesses meant more than grand gestures. As they climbed onto the wagon, she took one last look at the house where she'd grown from girl to woman. Brennan was already there with workmen, eager to claim his prize. Let him have it, she thought. It's just walls now. But at the edge of town, Mary Louise called for Samuel to stop. She climbed down and walked to a small rise that overlooked the river. What are you doing? Ethan asked, following carefully. Saying goodbye. She knelt by a simple wooden cross. To my father. To who I used to be. Ethan stood quietly as she placed a river stone on the grave, a tradition her father had taught her. Leaving a piece of the land you're leaving behind. He'd be proud of you, Ethan said softly. I hope so. She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. I hope he'd understand the choices I've made. A man who died defending his principles, he'd understand better than most. As they walked back to the wagon, Mary Louise felt something shift inside her. The girl who'd found a wounded man by the river was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd chosen love over safety, truth over comfort, courage over acceptance. Regrets? Ethan asked, helping her climb up. She looked back once more at Redemption Creek, already shrinking in the distance. Then she looked ahead, toward mountains and possibilities and a life built on choice rather than chance. No regrets, she said firmly. Only anticipation. Margaret squeezed her hand. That's my girl. As Samuel urged the horses forward, Mary Louise leaned against Ethan's shoulder. His arm came around her. Steady and sure, they were leaving as outcasts, judged and scorned by those who valued propriety over principle. But they were leaving together, and that was worth more than all the acceptance in the world. The West had tried to break them with violence, with judgment, with the weight of civilization's expectations. Instead, it had forged them into something stronger. Tell me about California, she said. Ethan smiled. Green valleys and orange groves, ocean winds and soil so rich you can grow anything, a place where people go to become new. We don't need to become new, Mary Louise said. We just need to become ourselves, fully, without apology. Is that what we're doing? That's what I'm doing, she said. I'm done waiting for the world to decide if I'm worthy. I know my worth. It's not in virgin innocence or social acceptance. It's in the choices I make and the love I give and the stands I take. Philosophy from a river girl, Ethan teased gently. Wisdom from a woman who's learned the price of both conformity and rebellion, she corrected, and chosen rebellion every time. Behind them, Redemption Creek faded into the desert haze. Ahead, the rails beckoned westward. Mary Louise had waited by a river as convention demanded, but she'd chosen by that same river as her heart commanded. The town could have her reputation. She had something better, a life carved by her own hands, a love earned through fire, and the knowledge that when history came calling, she'd stood on the right side of it. That was worth any price the proper world wanted to extract. And in California, under new skies and beside new waters, she'd proved that a woman's worth wasn't measured in what she'd preserved, but in what she dared to risk for something greater than herself. The virgin by the river was gone. In her place rode a woman who'd wait for nothing and no one to give her permission to live fully, love freely, and face whatever came with the fierce grace of someone who'd already survived the worst and chosen to find joy anyway. The train carried them west through landscapes that changed like chapters in a book from desert to mountain, mountain to valley, until finally the air itself transformed, carrying hints of salt and possibility. Mary Louise pressed her face to the window as they descended into the Sacramento Valley, watching the world turn green in ways the desert never could. Look, Ethan, she breathed. "It's just like you said." Orange groves stretched toward distant hills, their neat rows promising order after chaos. Fields of wheat rippled like golden seas, and everywhere, the sense of life bursting from soil that didn't have to fight for every drop of moisture. They'd married in Las Cruces, a simple ceremony with Samuel Washington and a traveling preacher as witnesses. Mary Louise had worn her mother's wedding dress, hastily altered, while Ethan had managed to find a clean shirt that almost fit. It wasn't the church wedding she'd once imagined, but when he'd slipped his mother's ring onto her finger and promised to love her until the mountains crumbled to dust, she'd known it was perfect. It was. Now, 3 weeks later, they stood on the platform in Sacramento, their entire world in a few trunks and endless possibilities stretching before them. "The land agent said there's a farm for sale near Folsom," Margaret said, consulting her carefully kept notes. 40 acres with a house and barn. The owner's going back east. Gold didn't pan out for him." "Gold rarely does," Ethan observed. "But soil keeps its promises if you treat it right." They hired a wagon and made their way along the American River, following its course toward their future. The road was better than any in New Mexico, graded smooth and lined with wildflowers Mary Louise couldn't name. Everything felt softer here, gentler, as if the land itself had agreed to be more forgiving. The farm, when they reached it, made Mary Louise's heart ache with possibility. The house needed work paint peeling, porch sagging, but it was twice the size of their place in Redemption Creek. The barn stood solid, and beyond it, acres of untended orange trees waited for caring hands. "It's perfect," she said. "It's a disaster," Margaret countered, but she was smiling. "Which means it's priced right for starting over." Ethan walked the property boundaries, testing soil between his fingers, checking the water rights, examining the trees with the eye of someone who understood growing things. When he returned, his eyes held a light Mary Louise hadn't seen before. "We can make something here," he said simply. And they did. The first months were harder in some ways than facing down gunmen. The house needed everything from new shingles to fresh plaster. The orange trees had been neglected, requiring careful pruning and patience. Ethan's wounds, though healed, still pained him during long days of labor. More than once. Mary Louise found him sitting on the porch at sunset, hand pressed to his ribs, trying to hide the hurt. But they persevered. Neighbors came to help, curious about the newcomers, but willing to judge them by their work rather than their past. The Hendersons from the next farm over brought preserves and advice about local weather. Old Mr. Chen, who ran the general store in Folsom, extended credit without question and taught them which varieties of oranges brought the best prices. Mary Louise learned to drive the wagon to market, to haggle with buyers, to read the weather in California skies so different from desert storms. She planted a kitchen garden that exploded with abundant tomatoes, beans, squash, everything growing as if making up for all the lean years in New Mexico. Margaret started a small school, teaching local children their letters. Word spread of the educated woman from back east who made learning feel like adventure rather than chore. Soon, she had more students than she could handle, and the small building they'd converted from a shed rang with young voices reciting poetry. And Ethan transformed. The man who'd lived by the gun learned to live by the plow. His hands, which had dealt so much death, coaxed life from soil and tree. He'd work from dawn to dusk, then sit on the porch with Mary Louise, planning next season's planting or just watching the sun set over their own land. "Do you miss it?" she asked one evening, as summer turned toward fall. "The excitement, the danger." "Every man thinks he wants excitement," he said, pulling her closer on the porch swing they'd built together. "Until he finds peace. Then he realizes excitement was just noise trying to fill the quiet spaces. And now the quiet spaces are full," he said simply, hand resting on her stomach where their child grew. Full of better things than gun smoke and glory. They'd discovered the pregnancy in late summer, Doc Hamilton in Folsom, confirming what Mary Louise had suspected. Ethan had actually cried this hard man who'd faced death without flinching, undone by the promise of life. "What if I'm no good at it?" he'd asked that night, vulnerability naked in his voice. "What if the violence in me—" "We'll protect our children," she'd finished firmly. "Just like your conscience protected those who couldn't protect themselves. You're not a violent man." Ethan Cole. You're a man who used violence when justice required it. There's a difference. Fall brought the harvest oranges like small suns, heavy with juice and promise. They hired local help, young men who called Ethan Sir and Mary Louise Ma'am without irony. The profits weren't enormous, but they were enough. Enough to pay off the mortgage, enough to buy winter supplies, enough to prove they could make this work. Thomas Brennan would have been appalled at how little enough meant to them. One evening in November, as rain pattered gently on their new tin roof, a letter arrived from New Mexico. Mary Louise recognized Doc Morrison's handwriting and opened it with trembling fingers. "What is it?" Margaret asked, looking up from her lesson plans. Mary Louise read aloud. "Dear friends, thought you'd want to know Doyle was convicted. 20 years hard labor. Bradshaw too, though he got only 10. Town's different now. Cleaner. Some folks even speak kindly of you, though it took time for shame to turn to recognition. Brennan left for San Francisco. His businesses failed without Doyle's protection. The house stands empty. Seems nobody wants to buy the place that cast out heroes. Samuel sends regards. Says if you ever need anything, just write. Same from me and the others who remember what courage looks like. Hope California's treating you well. You deserve all the happiness this hard world can spare. Doc Morrison. P. Reverend Mills had a change of heart. Preached last Sunday on false judgment. Better late than never, I suppose. Mary Louise set the letter aside, surprised to find her eyes dry. Redemption Creek felt like another lifetime, another woman's story. Does it help? Ethan asked. Knowing they recognized the truth now, it might have once, she admitted. Now it's just noise from a place that doesn't matter anymore. Christmas came with green grass instead of snow, but they made it magical anyway. Margaret cooked a feast. Ethan carved wooden toys for Mary Louise's students, and Mary Louise, heavy with child now, directed decorating from a chair by the fire. They sang carols and told stories and felt the absence of the one person who should have been there, Ben Carter, whose courage had shaped them all. But the sorrow was gentle now, worn smooth by time and sweetened by the knowledge that his legacy lived on in every choice they made. On New Year's Eve, as 1874 prepared to give way to 1875, they stood on the porch watching stars wheel overhead. The Rivera family from 2 farms over had joined them, along with the Chens and old Wilhelm the blacksmith. Community, built not on old ties but new ones, forged by shared work and mutual respect. No regrets, Ethan asked again. Their private ritual. Mary Louise looked around at her mother, laughing with Mrs. Chen, at their neighbors' children playing in the yard, at the orange trees standing like soldiers in neat rows, at this man beside her who'd traded his demons for dreams. No regrets, she confirmed, then gasped as the baby kicked hard. Though I think someone's eager to join the celebration. 2 weeks later, as January rain blessed the earth, Benjamin Ethan Cole arrived screaming into the world. His father's gray eyes, his mother's determined chin, and a voice that suggested he'd inherited stubbornness from both sides. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, holding his son with hands that shook. "How is he so perfect?" "Because he's ours," Mary Louise said simply. "Because he's the best of both of us, with none of our mistakes to carry." As she watched the man she loved cradle their child, Mary Louise remembered another January, another life, a girl waiting by a river, convinced that purity meant stillness, that virtue meant never choosing anything dangerous or real. That girl was gone, transformed by fire and choice into something stronger. In her place sat a woman who'd learned that waiting wasn't virtue. It was fear dressed in propriety's clothes. Real virtue was in choosing love despite the cost, standing for justice despite the danger, building something beautiful from the ashes of what the world tried to burn. The river still ran through her dreams sometimes, but now it sang of beginnings rather than endings. And when their son grew old enough to ask about the scar on his father's side or why they'd left New Mexico, they'd tell him the truth that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with blood and water, and the best lives are built by those brave enough to stop waiting and start living. Outside, the orange trees stood patient in winter rain, preparing for another season of bearing fruit. Inside, a family that had begun with a dying man and a courageous woman celebrated the continuation of their unlikely love. The virgin by the river had waited for life to find her. The woman in California had grabbed life with both hands and shaped it into something worth all the judgments, all the losses, all the miles between who she'd been and who she'd chosen to become. And in the end, that transformation from waiting to choosing, from preserved to fully lived, was the greatest love story of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Mary Louise and Ethan's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and redemption in the untamed frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales alive.